Hey, this is Paranormal Girl. The Earth is flat. Yes, you heard it. The Earth is actually flat. So, why do we think that the Earth is actually 100% flat? Rapper B.O.B. has been criticized for publicly insisting the Earth is flat. You may think his claims are ludicrous, but the truth is, they don't go far enough. So let's take a look at what he says. Rapper B.O.B. has caused a furor by tweeting that the Earth is in fact flat, and you only need to look at the evidence to come to the same conclusion. Obviously, prominent scientists have openly mocked this claim, showing the many ways in which this is ludicrous, no matter how many people insist otherwise. They're right, though. Sadly, B.O.B. is wrong. His nonsense claims, such as the idea that Earth's curvature should be visible at certain distances, isn't, and are just nonsense. His comments and insistent statements are little more than childish naivety. In truth, the conspiracy goes much, much deeper than that. For example, the Earth really is flat, as in totally flat, like a sheet of glass. The definition of flat is having a level surface without raised areas or indentations. So, how can you have tall buildings and mountains if the Earth is flat? You can't QED. It would be like saying a hedgehog is flat, which, bearing an unfortunate encounter with a heavy goods vehicle, it clearly isn't. Some take issues like this based on flimsy evidence that they can see buildings, hills, trees, mountains, and things like everywhere that you may be in or on them right now. This is just another example of how blinkered people are. If you look closely, the clues are everywhere. For instance, the tallest supposed mountain on Earth, what is that, Everest? Except it isn't. The name is a giveaway. It's clearly a morphing of never rest. Because if you wanted to go to the biggest mountain, you'd literally never rest. Because it actually isn't there. What about all those people who have climbed it, they say? Well, consider all the people who have died supposedly doing so. How do you die climbing something that isn't there? You can't. They were obviously killed to protect the conspiracy, whereas those who survived were willing to play ball. If that isn't clear enough, pretty much everyone who attempts to climb Everest takes oxygen with them. Why would they do that when there's oxygen all around us in the air? Wherever they're going, it isn't on Earth. You know where you need oxygen, though? The moon. That's where they're going. So-called mountaineers are being sent to the moon in order to fake climbing Everest. This is why NASA had to fake the moon landing with astronauts. So this is why NASA had to fake the moon landing with astronauts, because it was already full of mountaineers that they... Yes, so this is why NASA had to fake the moon landings with astronauts, because it's already full of mountaineers and they couldn't risk exposing that conspiracy. So, see how this all adds up? Some might still object because they're currently sitting in a tall building. They're not, actually. They're only thinking they're sat in a tall building. In truth, everyone is breathing in potent mix of hallucinogens that are constantly in the air around us, that these cause us to perceive buildings and tall things where there are none. How did these hallucinogens get into the air? Well, that's what chemtrails are actually for. Think about it. How many times have you seen a chemtrail only to fall ill? and then you can't think straight. How many of us have actually done that? But don't worry, these hallucinogenic compounds aren't provided by evil Big Pharma. They're actually secreted by the shape-shifting lizards that rule society. Why do you think lizards are in charge in the first place? They provide the secretions that keep the population in line. Yes, you've heard it here first. Believing in things like the earth is round and building exists. Tall buildings, that is. The few times people have actually tried to make a tall building like the World Trade Center, it's destroyed by the government. And sadly, that was true. It did actually get destroyed. But not quite sure who by. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Some refer to false flags at times like this. In truth, all flags are false. They're non-existent tall structures, so are just firmaments of our collective imagination. Figments of our collective imagination. This leads us on to other considerations though, like how thick is the earth? It may be totally flat, but nobody said it's two-dimensional. It must have a thickness because we can go underground or underwater. Unlike mountains, the oceans are clearly real because otherwise, where did Atlantis go? The deepest part of the ocean we know about is the Mariana Trench, a full 7 miles down. This means the earth is at least 7 miles thick, and probably a lot more so, because there is a lot of water on top of it, and it would need to be solid enough to keep it all in, lest all of the seas leak out of the bottom of the world. This clearly isn't happening, even if you do ignore the nonsense that the rising sea levels due to global warming are happening. How can you have global warming without a globe to warm? Hoisted by our own petard day scientists. Maybe the world is as thick as it is as wide, and is actually a cube. Scientists scoff at this notion, arguing that gravity would mean the atmosphere would be much thicker at the center of each surface and nearly barren at the poles. But have you noticed how the atmosphere is much more humid at the so-called equator, yet the poles are practically lifeless? Coincidence? Obviously not. When you follow this train of logic, it becomes clear that the only feasible conclusion is that Earth is indeed flat, flatter than anyone has ever expected. Either that, or the human brain has a habit of looking for patterns in innocuous and coincidental occurrences, ascribing great significance to any connection it can find and trying to make sense of them despite the absence of any concrete evidence. But seriously, that is a bit far-fetched claim, don't you think? So let us take a look at, before I go, a map that I found. Is quite a very old map. Square and Stationary Earth, Hot Springs, South Dakota. So here's a map of the Earth that I found that they believed was flat. Flat Earth map drawn by Orlando Ferguson in 1893. The map contains several references to biblical passages as well as various jabs at the globe theory. I'll leave the link in the description and you can take a look at this in more detail. So, my question to you, what do you believe the Earth is? Do you believe it's flat? Or do you actually believe it's a globe? Or do you think there's hallucinogens being jettisoned from the chemtrails? Leave a comment in the section below. I'd be interested in your theory on this. Thank you for listening.